Hello, it's Jack Tutor here of Attention Magazine. Welcome to Crucial Listening, the podcast where I speak with experimental musicians and sound artists about 3 albums that are important to them. My guest this time is Richard Chartier, a sound artist based in Los Angeles. I've been speaking to Richard for quite some time. His label, Line, was one of the first labels I ever reached out to with Attention Magazine back in 2011 or something to say, hey, can I review your releases? And I'm so glad I did that. I mean, I'm still listening to and loving Line releases now. The label is so wonderful in its presentation of releases. It's digital only now, actually. It used to be CDs, but nonetheless, the releases really justify themselves in the digital format, and the quality of the audio as well is exquisite. I mean, the artists they bring on are all absolute pioneers of, audio sculpture, I guess. But Richard also does his own work solo, under his own name, and also under the alias Pinkcourtesyphone. And just recently, Pinkcourtesyphone released a new album on Lawrence English's Room 40 imprint called Indelicate Slices. And it's a dark record. I mean, Pinkcourtesyphone is marked by quite a lavish sound. There's a lot of easy listening samples that have been smeared out across empty space that become these really beautiful, kind of flourishing, unfurling textures. But there's a lot of, well, as Richard says, anxiety as we speak in this interview, but a lot of low frequencies curdling in both the audio but also in my stomach as I listen to this. So it was really great to speak to Richard about the new record, but also about his 3 albums, which, I mean, he picked some great ones. And we have some great chats about them, and they seem to track a certain lineage of his development as an artist as well, which is really interesting. So you can check out Richard's work at richardchartier.bandcamp.com, and you can check out the label Line at lineimprint.bandcamp.com. And without further ado, Richard Chartier on Crucial Listening. Hello, Richard. Welcome to Crucial Listening.
Hi, thank you for having me on.
Thank you for joining me. I want to start by asking about your new album on Room 40 called Indelicate Slices. I've been really enjoying listening to that record over the past few weeks. And I understand that there's been a thematic lineage going through the albums that you've released as Pinkcourtesyphone up until this point, with like Elegant and Detached being Beauty and Desire, and Ravishment of Mirror being Hollywood Dreams and Deception. So I'm curious as to where Indelicate Slices fits in, if it does at all, into this lineage that you've generated with the album so far.
Well, they all, like you said, they all have themes. They're all kind of thematically presented. And Indelicate Slices is really the only theme I could come up with when I was working on all these pieces is anxiety. And it really is anxiety about the past year and a half. Political situations, the world, just the election, everything that happened afterwards. So, just this constant being on edge and anxiety. It's pretty dark. It's a dark album. There was a point where I was working with Lawrence English of Room 40 to, figure out the track listing and I kept going back and forth, and then there was this one piece. I'm like, oh, this is this. I can't remember which one it was. It was I think it's the first piece, Romantic Threat, and oddly enough, Romantic Threat had too much romance in it, and it was about, I think it was about 10 minutes longer than it is now, or 9 minutes longer, and right now it's 2 minutes and 50 something seconds, I think, and it was. I basically listened to it. And I was like, it's too romantic. It's too. It's uplifting. There's a lightness and a happiness to it that it had to be removed. So it was surgically removed from this album. And so now it becomes more of this little tiny compact intro as opposed to this sprawling romance. And that was really, usually I would make something more for Pinkcourtesyphone, more flowery or more elegant or more, beauty. But this was just, it was a strange situation where I cut it out, excised it.
It's interesting you say sounds like the main driver of doing that was through duration and bringing that duration down. And it does seem on this record that you do seem to play with duration quite a bit. The pieces range from 2 minutes to like 24 minutes, I think, the longest piece.
Yeah, I've been trying to do shorter pieces. That's also but it's also hard for me to work small as like short pieces. So I'm trying to do more of those just because I'm more interested in what can I do in this short time frame that makes it feel just as long as a kind of a long durational piece. So it's tricky.
That's interesting. You mentioned there about you trying to make something have the illusion of being like an extended piece, even though it takes place within like a smaller time frame.
Yes. Well, it's funny because when I perform live, people always say, "Oh, why'd you play such a short set?" And I'll say, "Oh, well, it was 45 minutes." And they're like, "Oh, I thought it was 15 minutes." That happens a lot. That happens quite a lot. And so that's part of it making me think, okay, well, can I make it feel like it's longer? If it's shorter? Can I make it feel like it's shorter if it's longer? I don't know, So it's an exercise.
One thing that actually really interests me about this record was the accompanying press text, which I understand you wrote yourself, and it's interesting because obviously I read so many of those, and generally I am granted a small insight into what I'm about to be listening to. With your press text, it felt like almost the opposite happened. I was a bit bewildered by what I read, but then as soon as I listened to the record, it felt like a perfect fit. It felt like a really nice articulation, I guess, of, I don't know, there was a grace and discomfort to the way that you worded it that almost enacted the atmosphere of the record rather than giving any kind of useful description going in. What was your thinking by constructing it in that way?
That's funny you should bring that up because I hate writing press releases. I also hate reading press releases or proofreading press releases. So with the Pinkcourtesyphone stuff, there is subject matter, so there's something for me to, there's a narrative, so there's something for me to grasp onto, but I don't want to necessarily give away everything. So it's more about setting a mood rather than saying, and then I used X software to make this happen. And, I don't know. It's just some press releases that I get. I'm just like, really? The art speak just goes, oh, God. It kills me. It's the same thing reading artist statements. Not that saying mine's any less arty, but I think with my works, I try to create an environment or a space. So it made sense to make a press release that was, I don't want to say poetic, but it's not standard. Mm. It's more just like, it's more stream of consciousness kind of thing. So it's like a floaty press release that hangs in the air, and you read it and you say, what was that? I mean, that would be great if people, left after, left listening to the album. It's like, oh, what was that?
Yes.
I don't know. I like things that kind of pull you in and make you think or feel or, experience some kind of sensorial event.
Yeah, it's happened a few times, actually. People have come up to me when I've reviewed a record that they've been involved in releasing and said, I read your review and I have absolutely no idea what you thought of that particular record. And it's nice to get a kick out of that in a way, because
I like that.
Yeah.
I'd much rather read a review of something like that rather than saying, oh, it sounds like X. Like, that's a difficulty with writing about sound or music, is that we're very limited into how we can describe things. Most things are described, like simile or metaphor, like it sounds like a cat meowing. Slowed down, or whatever. But
yeah.
I think it's difficult to talk about sound. I don't know. It sounds very esoteric. It's just kind of this, I don't know.
A lot of the language becomes very visual, and suddenly people are talking about bright things or hard things, or or tactility. Things are heavy, things are soft. It's strange that we have to analogize to these senses that I guess do feel more tactile, because I guess it's like people worry that as soon as they describe a sound in a certain way, that it's very difficult to say you're hearing it this way as well.
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess it's like a synesthesia, synesthetic reviews. That's the way for us to go. Just kind of like where all senses are crossed.
You mentioned, in fact, that it was almost trying to conjure a space or reflect the fact that the music on this new album is a space. And in terms of the environment that you've made with Pinkcourtesyphone, I mean, I've seen references to at least previous albums having a basis in the horror and isolation of suburban living in the mid-20th century. I mean, does the project still reside within that setting for you?
I don't think it's necessarily that it's set in a certain period. I think that, some of the samples that are used are from that period, but they're not necessarily all from that period. It does extend much further. And I think it's also, it's reflective of what goes on now. It's just there's still that everything is made up. I mean, the last track on the first album I ever did for Pinkcourtesyphone is called All Made Up. It's a double entendre, like a lot of the titles of Pinkcourtesyphone, but all made up. Everything is made up. This whole idea of perfection is made up. The idea of suburbia, pretty little houses, that's all made up. Everything's made up. So I don't think it's necessarily has to be set, or framed within that. This album, I don't know. I don't think it's necessary. Well, I mean, ultimately you want your work to be timeless. So I'm not necessarily, I don't want to say that, this is 1950s electronic, or whatever. Like play it next to your Eames chair. But there's a certain allure from that period that I have, because it's just so false, and Hollywood is just so false, and it's all made up. Smoke and mirrors, capitalism, that's all made up. It's all smoke and mirrors.
Yeah. I guess it's reflected in the fact that it sounds like you kind of use these samples regardless of what decade they're from, but within the context of a present tense emotional sentiment, right? I mean, they still have it penance now.
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, when I listen to that, music, like easy listening stuff from the 50s and 60s and 70s and stuff like that, there's just something about it that I find very fascinating, because it is all just so bland yet magical. Pinkcourtesyphone, bland yet magical.
That's your next press release.
That's my next album. Or that's the best of. I don't know. I keep making a running list of titles for Pinkcourtesyphone, and I have a special area for the best of compilation album, if that ever happened. So that's a good one. What was it? I already forgot what it was. Oh, bland and magical.
Where does your interest in the theme actually come from? I mean, is it something that is born out of experiences that you've had personally, or something you've just got a fascination with from a distance?
Well, it starts from the music, actually, from that time period, because my parents had a lot of that kind of easy listening stuff. That was always played if my parents had like a dinner party or something, and I started being interested in buying that type of music because you could always find it at the thrift store, or charity shop or yard sale, a flea market. So I was very into buying stuff like that, mainly for the covers. I was very interested in the covers. They seemed like another world to me. So that was always of interest. I also collect mid-century modern furniture. I used to have a little shop in Washington, D.C. So all these things, it's like they all kind of mesh. And then I think the aspect of Martin Denny and Exotica came in when I started listening to Throbbing Gristle, and then the references, in their music to that as well. And then reading in Research Magazine about how they love Martin Denny, and it I don't know, it's like a perfect little storm. It all made sense. So that's where all that came from. But Pinkcourtesyphone as a project didn't really start until I think 1997. I did the first two pieces, which are actually on the first album in a different form. And I was originally going to send those to Lou Kirby of VVM at VVM Records, because I heard, I don't know if Caretaker was out at that time. I can't remember. But anyway, I was going to send it to them, and then I just ended up not doing it because my work kind of took a different direction, like my work under my own name. So that kind of just went away. And it wasn't until I started working on that again, which was like 2011, I started working. I found those sound files and started working with them again. So that's how that came back up. Did that answer the question? I'm not sure.
Yeah, totally. It's a very broad question, so no, absolutely it does. I mean, you mentioned...
Tell me about your life, thematically.
You mentioned there about the fact that your own music under your own name pulled away at a certain point into a different territory. I mean, I'm curious as to how that duality exists for you now between the two projects. What's it like going back and forth between those two projects in terms of the way that you approach, working with them? I mean, do they require anything unique to each one in order to exist, in terms of the way that you're interacting with that music? Like, a different setting or a different mindset?
Definitely. It's a very different way of working. That's one of the things I really like about Pinkcourtesyphone and working on Pinkcourtesyphone pieces. I allow things to be much more accidental in it, and I'm not trying to remove all the, hiss and the, it's very dense. A lot of it can be very dense, and I'm fine with that because I really like, there's a certain thing I like about that because it's very different than if I'm working as Richard Chartier, as me. My solo work is very, very minimal and has a lot of space and silence, and that work takes a lot longer for me. Like, I'm working on three albums right now simultaneously under my own name since 2014. Like, I'm trying to figure them out.
Oh man. So
I'm very much a perfectionist when it comes to that, and it's very hard for me to say, okay, yes, now this is done. Because that's the thing about working on a computer is you can always tweak something. You can always change it a little bit. I like that, but it's also, drives me crazy. Also, it's very difficult for me to work on that type of material because I don't necessarily want to listen to that. Like I did a piece with Ella, Eleh. I'm always saying it wrong, but that piece there was an hour and something worth, and then we split it into another piece, which is a little bit over 2 hours. That was really hard to do because it was just so. It's a long time. It's like it's durational listening. It's like durational editing and tweaking and trying to make it just right. Like you have to start all the way over at the beginning. So I think that with Pinkcourtesyphone, there's a lot more leeway for me to put in a lot of my interests that did not appear in my other work. Because other work is kind of non-narrative, non-referential. Like that's my goal, was to kind of be, it is sound, it is just sound. With Pinkcourtesyphone, it becomes much more musical, thematic. It's got a narrative, which is very, very different. So I'm sure there's people that think, oh, it all sounds the same, but I think it's very different. I think it's, I'm also working with vocalists, and so that's been different. I've also done a couple of dancey tracks, which has been very, it's very unusual. And I could not believe how long the pieces I did with Kid Congo Powers from the Cramps and the Gun Club, and, the Cave of Bad Seeds, like how long that took for me to assemble. It was just so complex because my brain just doesn't work like that. I don't have a dance music brain. I DJ, but I don't have a dance music brain like creating it. So it's a very strange process for me. But I learned from it, so that's good. I'd do it again.
You mentioned there about the fact that working with long duration work,
yes,
obviously takes up a lot of time, funnily enough. But there must be some kind of creative drive that supersedes that. What is it that keeps you going with durational work in spite of the fact that there's, I don't know, I guess in quite a dry sense, a lot of admin involved, and practically it's quite a long. It takes a long time to do.
Well, I mean, I do love creating it, and I do think I do get something out of it. There is that compulsion to create. So there is something in me that, I make this for a reason. Like I feel compelled to create works. I'm attracted to certain types of sounds. I would much rather listen to other people's work than my own. And I think that's the only problem with creating really long durational works and working on them for so long, is that I don't get to listen to other people's music as much.
Right.
That's one thing, like, oh, I really would like to listen to all this music that, I downloaded, that I bought. And it's just sitting there, But yeah, I think that, it comes in spurts is a horrible word. That sounds really gross. But, it comes in times where it's like, I feel very compelled. I have to work on this. I have to work on this particular thing. And I can work on it for days and days and days. And then there's just something that's like, okay, I've got to stand back from it. I mean, I don't like to listen to my old work. Like I will let something, like after something comes out, and I've said this before in interviews, it's like, if something comes out, I don't want to listen to it for several months to a year, just because I'm going to pick it apart. Because there's always something you could have done. That could have been a little quieter, a little louder. Yeah. I could have not released that at all. it's the artist attacking themselves kind of thing.
With these 3 albums you got in the works, can you see endpoints with any of them on the horizon?
Yes, deadlines. That will be Yeah, I think they're almost done, but I'm trying to think of how they all work together. And I think, once the pieces are done, it's like how do they fit together? Which comes first? What's the order of the tracks? So there's still a lot of. I mean, an album is like putting a visual exhibit. Once you have all the pieces done, then you figure out, okay, how do you present them within a space? Because I feel like when an album is out, it's like you're taking it and giving it to someone else for them to put it in their space, wherever they may be listening to it. So there's a certain sense of letting go. Like, I have to let go of it. Take my baby. That kind of thing. And people will treat it. People will listen to it in the way that they want to listen to it, and I think that's fine. There's a lot of people that say, "Oh no, my work has to be listened to in this particular way." I'm like, no, you can listen to my work in the way that works for the listener. You can't control that.
Speaking of ways of listening to the work, I saw actually in an interview about Pinkcourtesyphone, you talked about a hidden code within the project.
Oh yes.
Has anyone figured that out yet?
No. No. I mean, it's probably overthought, and I know what it all is. Yeah. So, I mean, a few people have been like, "Oh, I know what that's from," or I know, because it's the samples that are used, whether it's the musical phrases or pieces of audio from film or television, the titles of the pieces, the titles of the albums, thematically. So there's clues in around it, but it's just my own. Maybe it's just a message for me. I don't know. It's fine.
Yeah. I mean, I always wonder about those where people embed little clues. That it must be so difficult to suss out, because there has to be that time delay to generate the satisfaction in someone to have actually unlocked it. But
yeah,
how do you escape your own head?
I thought about things where, when it comes out on vinyl, doing those little messages. I used to be obsessed with those little messages on the inner rings of LPs. I forgot what that's called. The run out groove.
Yeah.
Those little messages. Like, I was always fascinated. What is that? What does that mean? And I thought about doing that for a couple of these, and I'm like, no, that's taking it too far. I can't. I can't get that. I can't go that deep. That's too much. So that's why you won't find any messages on the run out groups.
We should talk about some albums, Richard. You've been so kind to put together a list of 4 albums that you deem to be important to you. And one question that I like to ask people when they come on the podcast, because I think every time I've got a different answer, is how you considered the term important. And I think there was a hint within your email to me when you sent the list over that there was a certain thread that connected these in terms of how they impacted you. Maybe, again, now it's me overreaching, but I'd love to know how you thought the term important when you're putting this list together.
Well, the 3 or 4 that I chose are kind of three different points of my interest in music and my interest in listening, and how I listened, and how they shaped me thinking about listening or processing sounds, and like what music can be. That was kind of the 3 groupings. So they're from 3 different periods of time. Because there were a lot that I was thinking about, and I was like, oh, I don't know which ones. But these have a kind of magical resonance, I guess, to me.
So let's start with
Shall we start?
First. Yeah.
Okay.
If you'd like to introduce it and just tell me a bit about why it's important to you as well.
Well, the first album is Computer World by Kraftwerk from 1981, I believe. Growing up, my parents had, easy listening records and some disco records and Cheech and Chong and Bill Cosby records, like comedy records, which were kind of weird. And then there were two other records that I was very interested in. One was Autobahn by Kraftwerk, and the other one I can't remember. It was either Alpha Centauri or Phaedra by Tangerine Dream. So it's a kind of an odd collection of things, and of course I was immediately drawn to the weird things because I was, a weird kid. So that was actually my first entree into electronic music and Kraftwerk. One of the first records I ever bought was the 12-inch to Tour de France, because all the cool kids in junior high school were breakdancing, and that was like the hot breakdance track.
Wow.
That everyone had to have. So I was like, oh, that's really neat. I'll buy this instead of trying to save up to buy a bright red leather Michael Jackson jacket. It was that period, and everyone had one. So Kraftwerk Computer World was, I think, the one I bought right after that, but that's the one that really made me go, wow, this is so cool. I'd been listening to, I guess I hadn't been really listening. That was kind of really the first electronic music other than the stuff that was in my parents' record collection. But by that time, I was just listening to things on the radio, like taping it off the radio, and just like kind of lame pop things, whatever was on the radio. Kraftwerk was obviously not on the radio. So I ended up, that was Kraftwerk's Autobahn's 1984-ish. Is that right? So I would be about 13 or 14, depending on what month it came out in. And then I went, I was interested in that, so I got Computer World, and I was like, ooh, this is great. I liked the kind of throwback graphics. Well, I guess at that time they weren't throwback. Kind of everything looked like that. But it's kind of me hearing electronic music, electronic dance music, and I was fascinated by the first thing I read about them was, that some of it's actually, when they go on tour, it's just robots. Like, they don't actually appear. And so the whole idea of this illusion of performance was very interesting to me. Like, they weren't stars. They were just German robot dudes. Yeah. I don't know. There's something very appealing about that to me at that time. And that kind of inspired me to not listen to anything with guitars. So after that, it was kind of like against guitars and drums. I wanted drum machines, synthesizers, and that kind of pushed me into that whole synth pop world, listening to that, Depeche Mode and Soft Cell, and I went crazy over it for a long time. Still am. So that's that. I mean, did you have any particular questions about the album? I mean, that's why I chose it. I mean, I still love it. Computer Love is one of my absolute favorite songs.
Yeah, it's gorgeous.
Yeah, that's a good wedding song.
Good wedding song, do you say?
Yeah, why not? Actually, the second side is great. Home computer, and it's more fun to compute. I like all of this because they have a weird darkness to them. Pocket Calculator, not so much. It's not. I would say it's my least favorite song on that album because all the rest has a kind of darkness to it.
Oh, I find Pocket Calculator really dark.
Really?
Yeah. It's because there's a superficiality which feels, so I'm doing a lot of reflection on how much I use my phone right now, and hearing that song gave me the chills.
That's true.
So that was the angle I was coming at.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, that's true. Oh, okay. I'll have to re-listen and think about that.
But the wedding song thing is a good point. I'm putting together a wedding playlist at the moment.
Computer Love, and it's like 8 minutes long. So.
Yeah.
It's it's a good song to play if you have to go to the bathroom while you're DJing.
One thing I did want to ask about is, going back to your parents' record collection, have you ever asked them why these two records, Tangerine Dream and Kraftwerk, existed in their collection?
I think I have not asked them that, but I think it's part of the whole disco thing, because Autobahn was kind of like in that disco era. And so there were a lot of disco-y records in the collection as well. Like Chic and stuff like that. And like earlier disco stuff. So I think that's where that came in and why it didn't continue after that. Maybe they bought Radioactivity and were like, ooh, this is a downer, But yeah, I mean, those three albums, Radioactivity, Man Machine, and Computer World, those are the core group that I love. I think that's most people. And I don't like the mix, for example. I won't go into that. But so that's where that all came from.
You mentioned that it drove you into drum machine synthesizers. So were you generating music on the back of getting heavily into Kraftwerk and other such artists?
Yeah, sure. I did the first keyboard I got, I think, was a Yamaha DX100, which I still have recordings from, which actually were used in Pinkcourtesyphone on tracks. So like weird little, things that I recorded on tape somewhere. So I did have that. I did play along to my Depeche Mode records, and I can play Pocket Calculator on the synthesizer and all that. One keyboard at a time. I would trade it in. Like once I got that first one, I would trade it in, and then if I got some money from my grandparents or something, I would try and buy a larger one, or like a better one. So I was always interested in that, and it wasn't until I guess around 88 or 87, I'm not sure, where I started to listen to stuff that was even weirder, because I had a friend who had an older brother, and he listened to really weird music. He listened to Nurse with Wound and White House and Soviet France and John Duncan and the Hafler Trio, things like that. So that's my next progression. And the keyboards reflected it, like how I was using the keyboards reflected into that. Because at that point, I learned about loops. Like I learned about thinking about loops and Brian Eno, things like that. Like a song doesn't have to be rhythmic. It doesn't have to be chorus, verse, chorus, verse, chorus to fade, or whatever. And so that's kind of where my listening shifted. Can I say the next one?
I think it's the perfect time.
The next album that I chose was Shadow Thief of the Sun by Soviet France, which is a huge influence on me and the way I was listening to things. I was also getting into design at that point and fascinated by the packaging design of Soviet France. Because at that time you could go to a record store. Let's say I would go to Tower Records, and I would go to the import section, because who wants a boring old American pressing of something? I went to the import section, and it was just all this strange stuff, and all these beautiful packagings for 4AD, and you could buy something with a good album cover, like a beautiful, hypnotic, weird, mysterious album cover, and usually it was good, hypnotic, mysterious, and weird. So that's how I kind of went into Soviet France, is all these packaging. I was like, I have to have all of these. These are amazing. And I would save up to buy the next one. And then there was always a new one. It's like, wow, this album's in burlap. This is in metal. What is this? It kind of blew my mind. There was no internet. So it was just kind of like, you just reached out and grabbed whatever you could. And it's not like I could, at the record store, I couldn't listen to these things. So it was really a leap of faith, let's put it that way. But yeah, that kind of allowed me to see a different way of making music using sounds. Like it wasn't keyboards, it wasn't discernible, it wasn't Pocket Calculator, that's for sure.
Did you did you like it instantly? What
yes.
was you did?
I've said this before in many interviews, but when I was a kid, I really loved listening to air conditioners, and I really loved listening to the refrigerator.
Right, yeah.
Like putting my ear up to the refrigerator in our kitchen, because we sat at dinner in the kitchen, and I was always up against the refrigerator. So waiting for dinner, I would put my ear against the refrigerator and listen to it. And so when I once got a review that said that, I could make this with my refrigerator, I was like, I'm done. That's the best review ever.
Taking you full circle, yeah.
But if you think about that, it was these kind of sounds that, there wasn't a beginning and an end. That was my introduction to drone music, was my refrigerator. It wasn't one of the greats. It was a refrigerator. So that kind of, yeah, I was just very fascinated by it. It was very mysterious. Things like the Hafler Trio, where it was just this completely confusing, weird journey. And that all these things were kind of like a journey. They weren't about listening to a song, and here's the beginning and here's the end, and here's the musicality that happens, the structure that happens. They were kind of seemed structureless. So that was really fascinating to me, listening to them. I just got lost in it all. So that's where my kind of listening shifted. And I started to make work, which I actually released. It's available digitally on my Bandcamp. It's like 3 or 4 hours of tape, things I did recorded to tape with a synthesizer or two that are just not, like, it's just kind of droney and weird. And that was from like 1990 to 93, I think. And then I actually stopped making music because I felt like I didn't really have anything to say. I was like, well, all this stuff is I'm finding all this great music. I really don't have anything to add. And so I stopped in 92 or 93 and then started back up in 1997, which leads us to the next album, if you want me to talk about that next.
Yeah, well, before we do, I just wanted to ask, why Shadow Thief of the Sun? You mentioned you bought a lot of these very beautiful import releases, and I read somewhere, I don't know whether it came out in another edition, but I read this very gushing tribute to the way they did their packaging, and then there was a line that was like, oh, disappointingly, Shadow Thief of the Sun just came out in a jewel case.
Oh, that's true. That is true. But I still think it's I'm looking at it right now.
Ah.
I still think it's very beautiful. But I guess that was the first one that didn't have like an elaborate package. That is the first one, I think. I could be wrong. I'm not going to pretend to be an expert on any of this. It's the first album that was CD only. Like, it was before. Yeah, I guess it must have been. It was 19. Let's look in the package now. 1990. Yeah. So that came out right when I was my first year in college. I guess in comparison to the rest of them, it was, I guess people would cry a little bit because it's not. But that's when CDs really started to catch on. And there was a period where I remember I actually picked up a lot of music at that time that was when Tower Records was getting rid of all their vinyl. So their entire import section was like 50% off.
Oh, wow.
So I was just like, okay, this looks cool. Whatever. I don't know. But yeah, I mean, I don't really think of... It's interesting how obsessed I was with the packaging and how kind of little I think about packaging now, because I buy lots of things that are digital. I'm much more concerned about what the work is like, which I think is a good thing.
Yeah.
There are still people, I don't listen to that because it's not on vinyl. And I'm like, well, then you're missing out.
Yeah.
Oh, I won't listen to that because it's only digital. Well, then you're missing out. There's a lot of experiences that you miss out if you set parameters like that. So.
Yeah, totally. Also, as well, I guess it feels like something that overlooks the intrinsic, I don't know, the artistic decision-making that can often go into someone's decision to release via a certain format and dissociate from physicality for, some kind of creative intent.
I mean, that's why I didn't like vinyl, is because it was limiting. Sonically, it was limiting. And, for the work that I was doing early on, it's not really great for stuff with a lot of silence. That's for sure, Or really, really low frequencies or really, really high frequencies. And you're also limited by time. And I hate when there's an album that's like 2 LPs, but 3 sides. I just put it on CD or just don't put it. I just put it on digital or whatever, a lot of things ended up being, short. Like there could have been works that were really, really amazing, but they ended up being very, very short because they had to be on an LP. Anyway, time constraints.
Oh.
Now you can release a 3-hour thing, or, with Terry Templates, you can release a 22-hour thing, or, there's lots of options. So whatever medium works best for your work is how you should release it.
Just as an aside, so I put out something on Adam Barringer's Champion version recently, and I've never done vinyl before, and I sent him the tracks, and he was like, no, they're too long, they won't fit.
Yeah,
we're gonna have to do something with them. And I was like, oh shit, because I'd never done that before, work with vinyl, and oh man.
Yeah, it's like you think of how, what should this piece be, rather than, oh well, okay, I have 20 minutes to use in the space. Yeah, it can be frustrating. It's funny, I went back to when I was reissuing A Ravishment Mirror on 2 LPs through Thought Forms in the UK. That was in September, and it actually fit really well because I had 2 more extra pieces to put on it. But then I did have to cut one piece in half and put it on the other side, and and then I went back and looked at Description of Problem by Pinkcourtesyphone, and I'm like, oh wait, this actually works perfectly on 2 LPs. So maybe in the future, but that it's just a happenstance like that. Like if you have one piece that's 35 minutes long, it's going to be like Rubicon by Tangerine Dream. You're going to have to put on one side and then the other. Could talk about that forever.
Me too. One final question on that Shadow Thief record is, why did you pick that record in particular? Because I guess it was therefore based on the material rather than the packaging. What is it about that record in particular that makes it stand out for you?
I mean, I just really love it. I think it's a beautiful kind of summation of what they were doing. And I guess do they consider it like a mid-period? Like, I also love, the other one I was considering was, I'm probably going to say it wrong, Monomiche. I don't know, but I think that was 1983. Maybe that's another one of my favorites. But I was just trying to think of, I can't remember what the first Soviet France album was that I bought, but I know this one just made a big impression on me. Maybe because I was getting into CDs at that point. So I think I got a CD player in 1989.
Right.
So this would have been right around that time. There's a weird, I don't know, there's a deepness to this one which kind of reminds me of Mon Amiche, that I liked, because there was a very particular sound of Soviet France that I liked, and it tended to be the longer pieces that were on the different albums, and this was kind of like they were all like that. I don't know. I also like the samples, the vocal samples that are on this one.
Yeah.
So that could be part of it. The two pieces I love the opening piece, The Silver Gate, but then In My Secrecy, I Was Real, and Feel the Warmth are two pieces that I absolutely love. Like if I made a mixtape, that would be on all of them, you know, like at that time.
Actually, one thing I noticed this today, just because I was kind of collating all of my listening in advance of this podcast, is the use of kind of stereo delay on this record, where it kind of parries back and forth.
Mm-hmm.
As I went to that and then through to the new Pinkcourtesyphone, and in fact previous records as well, I've heard by the project there is also it feels like often that's used to the same sort of effect, or at least for me personally, it has that, I don't know, hovering kind of time suspension element to it. I mean, do you think there's an element of Soviet France in what you're doing with Pinkcourtesyphone?
Definitely, but people never point that out. You're probably the first person to point that out.
Hooray.
Yeah, I know. I mean, everyone always says like Angelo Badalamenti and The Caretaker, William Basinski, things like that. But I think it's that's more because of like that dark romance, but I think the way it's constructed is, yeah, I guess in a way is more like this album. Good point, Jack.
That's what I wanted to hear. Yeah, I need a lot of validation.
Don't we all?
So, albums 3 and 4, I guess. I imagine you'll want to talk about these in the, context of one narrative. But if you'd like to introduce them and tell me why they're important to you.
Well, I'll introduce the first album. They came from the same place. It was a place called Go Compact Discs and Records, which was in Arlington, Virginia, where I was living at the time. And they had a great buyer for electronic music and experimental music. So this was when I started getting into, I guess this is around 95. To me, this is post my interest in techno and kind of post my interest in industrial, like, Skinny Puppy type stuff. Like that's what I was DJing, but I was really, I really loved like experimental music. So I was listening to that too, but of course I wasn't, playing that at a bar or a club or whatever. And so this is around the time of, I hate this term so much, IDM, intelligent dance music. People still use it, so I'll use it too. But it was around that time where that stuff was coming out. There was a lot of drum and bass that was really interesting. It was a much more experimental take on electronic music. Like techno was just not, I'm talking about like Lords of Acid and stuff like that. Like all, just crowd pleasers. And, I was like kind of going towards things that were not crowd pleasers. And I go through the racks and I'm in the section, the letter P. And here's this blue album in a plastic sleeve and it says Panasonic on it. And I'm like, what? Why is there I thought this was like a stereo demonstration record. To test your CD player, to make sure it was at the right speed or working correctly or whatever. And I was like, what is this? Yeah. So I took it over to the listening station and I fell in love with it. I was like, this is the music of the future. I did. I thought that. So it was Vacchio, the first album by Panasonic. And That was in 1995, and the second album that goes in conjunction with this, which also came from the same store, was when it was actually recorded in the same time period. But it was in 1997. It's Phyllis, the album Tetra by Phyllis, which is Mika Vanyo. May he rest in peace. And this was like a more extreme version of Vacchio to me. Like it was like stripping it all down. And I have to open my little archival resealable sleeve to look at this.
Wow. I wonder what that was.
And the 8th track, which is, oh God, I don't know how to pronounce this, Anxioliti, which is about a 13-minute piece, just blows my mind. And that was really, these two albums inspired me to start making work again, because I felt like this is resonating with me. And so I ended up starting making electronic music again. So I do credit these and other albums, going on at the time. At the same time, I found Ryoji Akita. Carsten Nicolai's first album came out. So it was like all these things started happening at the same time. Like I was really interested in making music again, and I was like, I just want something clean. I want to make something clean and crisp, and and then I started hearing these things. I'm like, oh my God, there's other people that are interested in this, because I was doing minimalist paintings at the time. Like that was my thing. I was a painter. So yeah, it just kind of went from there. Like the first album I did, a boyfriend of mine at the time was like, well, if you want to make electronic music, why don't you just start using a computer? Because I had a computer at home, before most people didn't have a good computer at home. So I started with a shareware. I forgot, it was called like Sound or something like Sound Maker or something like that. It was free software. I think my first 4 albums were made using that. And later on, I guess a couple of years later, when I met Ryoji Akita and Carsten Nicolai, we were all talking about music and software and being nerds. And they were both like, that's what we started using. Wow. So it's interesting that this shareware program people were making similar work. Maybe not the sounds were similar, but like thematically it was kind of similar with this weird little, free software. I think you had to pay $20 for it at one point. I still wish I had it. I think I talked to Carsten Nicolai a couple of years ago, and we were like, oh, remember that sound program? Yeah. He's like, I wish we still had that. I wish we could get it. But it doesn't work on like any computer now. Yeah. You'd have to get like one of those old black, what were they called? Pismos or something? I don't know. The Apple laptops. Right. They're kind of like a black clamshell. They're really ugly. That was the last one it worked on, I think.
Wow.
So yeah, these 2 albums kind of, along with other music that was being made at that time, kind of shifted me into listening in a different way. I just felt like I was writing music reviews at the time, and I described the album Tetra as, what was it, lounge music for fluorescent light tubes or something like that, like party music for fluorescent light tubes. It was just had this weird, it just sounded so futuristic to me, and in a way that kind of work harkened back to Kraftwerk to me. Like that sounded so new and different and crisp and future, and so is that kind of thing. And like, so, the Soviet Front stuff, for example, which I was talking about, like that didn't feel future. That felt like it was dug up somewhere. Like it was like an archaeological dig or something, like a sonic archaeological dig. Does that make sense? I don't know. That's a really weird illusion.
Yeah. No, it does. I mean, as you were about to say your answer, I was thinking that it sounds like it stands separate from time, but I guess it's a similar idea in that it's...
Yeah, it's otherworldly. Like it doesn't sound like it's from anywhere.
Yeah, no, that absolutely makes sense.
In that way, it's timeless, but I think it's also that the way it's not constructed in, a song-based thing, that makes things feel kind of timeless. Not in the sense of, durational time.
You mentioned when you were DJing and you were gravitating away from like the crowd pleasers. What qualities were you looking for? Or what was it that was appealing to you about the stuff that didn't, I guess, satiate crowd expectation?
Well, my kind of motto, and it doesn't necessarily always work for every place you DJ at, is don't give them what they want to hear. Give them what they don't know they want to hear.
Uh-huh.
That, I think, it works in a lot of situations. But although the other night at my night procedure, this guy was like, "You need to play all 90s hip hop now." Like, what? Okay. What? Very interesting. There's always going to be that person that thinks you're, that they can talk to you like you're Siri. Siri play 90s hip hop.
Yeah.
I think that when I would go to things where DJs were, all I was interested was hearing something new. Like, I didn't want to hear what I had. I wanted to hear something. I'm like, what is this? There was no Shazam, so you had to go talk to the DJ, which is always, when you're younger, is terrifying at that time. Ask them what this is, and they're either going to tell you, oh, you're stupid, or ideally, they will be just as excited about the music as you are and tell you what it is and want you to, share in that. So I found a lot of amazing stuff through going out to clubs and listening to different music, because I would go to like techno clubs and industrial clubs and everything in between. I was interested in music at that time. Not to say that I'm not now. That's kind of bad. Yeah, does that answer? I can't remember what the question was.
No, me neither. Oh no, it was about crowd. It was about crowd pleasers and your gravitation away from that. So yeah, it absolutely does.
I think the idea of exploration is what makes me want to go away from crowd. I love a good pop song. Don't get me wrong, but there's something about things that take me somewhere else that I've just always been interested in. The inquisitive mind, I don't know, helps keep you sane.
Totally. But how does that play out in practice if you're a DJ? I mean, I don't know. What was the crowd split like? Because as you say, there's certain people who have certain wants of you when they, you're basically their music butler in their eyes. But
yeah, I mean, there's an asshole at every party. So yeah, wherever you go.
Yeah.
So there's no accounting for that. That's always going to happen. But like, how do I choose what to play? Or
no, I mean, when you playing stuff that adheres to your motto of give them what they don't want to hear. I mean, I know that from experience.
No, it's not. Don't give them what they don't want to hear. It's what they don't know they want to hear.
Sorry, I did hear it.
There are those DJs that will play what you do not want to hear, and they're out there too.
Yeah. But yeah, so I'm just intrigued as to how that plays out in practice, because I guess it's, I don't know, is it a difficult one to call when you think like, okay, this is going to be something that's going to really spark an interest in a lot of people? Is it easy to make that judgment as to, something that's going to spark someone's interest as opposed to something that someone's going to find completely alienating in that context?
I don't know. I mean, for example, I really haven't done any kind of DJ sets in a long time where I am trying to make people dance. Like trying to make people dance and keeping them dancing, because that's to me, that's the hardest thing to do, is to, because I've DJ'd in like rave settings or, techno club settings, whatever you want to call it. And keeping people dancing is a very tenuous path. I did this one thing there was a huge club in Washington, D.C. We ended up, my friends and I that did this night got invited to do an event on the patio. That's where we put the weird people usually. They put them on the patio of the club. So we were out. We were outside. It was a really nice night. It also ended up being the last night of the club entirely because it got busted by the armed services or something for drug deal. I don't know.
Oh wow!
But people were dancing, and we had them dancing and stuff. We were playing a lot of tech housey kind of stuff, and then I was dropping in Panasonic at the time. And what is that record? It's by the User, Symphony for Dot Matrix Printers. I played that, and I was like, okay, here we go. Like, who's going to be like, this sucks, or whatever. Yeah. And people were breakdancing to it. Like, spinning around on their heads and dancing to that. Like, the sound of dot matrix printers. So I'm like, okay. My work here is done. I don't know. But, I mean, I think when I do the night now that I do with Alejandro Cohen and Maria Minerva, we're just playing stuff that we like, and it's a mix. It's a broad mix of stuff. Most of the stuff I do is, kind of song-based stuff, electronic music, but it's never anything real super extreme because, we're in public. I don't know. It's, the one I would listen to at home, I would not necessarily play there at a bar.
Yeah.
People have expectations, so it's a fine line.
Yeah.
But I mean, when I'm thinking of like what to play next, it's really about, okay, what goes with this? What transition works with this? What kind of sounds go with this? Or what would be really weird with this? There's also that, you have to think of it in the same way that if you're constructing some kind of soundtrack, like a narrative soundtrack. It's like, how does this progress? How does it build? How does it crescendo? How does it plateau? How does it, come bottom out and come back up? And so I think of it in the same way. I probably put too much thought into it, and no one else is getting, the listening audience is probably not getting as much out of it as I'm thinking. Like, they're gonna think this is really a great combination of thematic choices of subject matter in these two songs. Like, no one's going to care.
Is that a way of also the way of constructing a narrative? I mean, is that a way of approaching as well some I don't know, like the edges of obscurity to sort of drip it in over the course of a few pieces to the point where suddenly you put something on and they're like, wait, what? This is just a bass drum.
And you put something really strange on, and you'd be surprised that the people that come up and they're like, what is this? And I'm thinking, oh God, they're going to be like, why are you playing this? Go away. And they're actually like, I've never heard anything like this. Like, someone actually came up a couple months ago and was like, what is this? I've never heard anything like this before.
Wow.
And I want to hear more of it. And I'm like, wow, okay.
That must be so cool. Yeah.
It's not, I'm not going to say that happens all the time because it doesn't. But be open about music. There's so much of it, and you're never going to know all of it.
I mean, that feels like a wonderful conclusion, really, doesn't it? But I'm going to ruin it because I had another question, but...
Thank you and goodbye.
Yeah, just hang up now. I'm intrigued because obviously these three records you've referred to in terms of putting you on a certain path or in a certain mindset with regards to creation, and I don't know whether there would be anything beyond this or whether it was curbed by the limitation of 3 or 4 records, but if there was to be like a next step and something that impressed upon the way in which you make music after this time, the mid-90s, I guess. Do you have any idea what that would be?
Oh, I'd have to think about that.
No, right now.
Right now. Well, actually, I would say the next progression after that would be things like Morton Feldman, Toru Takemitsu, like going back to...
Oh.
I don't like the term classical music because it just seems weird because it's not necessarily like classical. Like 20th century composers, I would say. And that includes things like electroacoustic stuff. I think that would have been the next kind of reflecting point for me, would be that kind of stuff. And I'm still digging around for that kind of stuff because, reissues come out all the time of these obscure private label things. And you're like, oh my God, this sounds like what I was doing 30 years after this came out. I mean, like Elaine Radic, things like that, like just really reflecting into composers and artists that were doing work that may have not was recognized at the time, but then somehow got maybe put in the backs of people's minds, like it wasn't always present. I don't know. There's just so many weird records that come out now that are reissued. And you're like, what? This is in 1967? What? I don't even know how they could have made this.
Yeah.
It's like beyond comprehension. But I think that kind of stuff. I'm still digging back into more easy listening stuff, just because I have a turntable, so now I'm like buying records from the thrift store again and finding more things.
Oh wow!
I mean, there's just been so much stuff that I would say from 2000 onward, there's just been amazing. There's just too many things. I don't know. I can't. I would say that was the next big chunk of music.
Yeah.
And that really, that kind of stuff influenced kind of the next stage of my work. Like Morton Feldman and Toru Takemitsu's use of space and silence. I think it's Toshio Hosokawa, another artist that I found when I was in Japan, more kind of 20th century composer, classical music, I don't know what they want to call it, but that really dealt with a lot of space. Space as in like just, stretched out time. The music that stretches time, I think that was kind of the stuff that I went to next. But through all the time, of listening to music, I still go back to these other things. It's not like I just went through these. You go through very specific phases of listening. There's a lot of stuff that doesn't really hold up, and I'm not going to mention those. But within different genres, you go back and you listen, you're like, oh, I really liked this. Like, like it doesn't quite hold up, or like very specific things, very specific tracks hold up. But I still go back to all these artists and listen to them. I mean, Mika Vagno was a huge influence. I bought everything he ever created, and I'm just really sad that he's gone, because I feel like there's so much more he would have made, because he's such a force in this electronic music, in different variants of electronic music, within the kind of techno, experimental, electroacoustic. I mean, just incredibly significant to all these different aspects. I mean, I was listening to Duran Duran the other day, so,
So you're listening to what?
Duran Duran
right.
the other day. It's like 3 albums of Duran Duran. I don't know why. But yeah, and things like that. That first album, so good. Holds up,
Yeah.
Don't be ashamed of anything you listen to. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. Yeah. It's weird, though, isn't it? Because I think that there's... and I often question this in myself, where there's things that I've listened to ages ago and, I don't know, got into ages ago, and they're still with me, and all the other stuff has fallen away. Whether there was something extra that was keeping that music by, or whether that initial instinct was actually just the same across everything that I was listening to, whether it was destined to stick with me or not. I'm not really sure what my point is there, but there's something there that I'm trying to grasp at about.
Do you think like nostalgia? Because I think about that, like, why do people listen to very specific music? Is it because of a nostalgia from that period of that time of an event that happened?
Yeah.
You know, like this song reminds me of something. Like, I'm not a big, for example, the other night we went to go see Call Me By My Name, that new film that just came out. And one of the key scenes, and I think it's used twice in scenes, is there is the use of Love My Way by Psychedelic Furs. I never got into Psychedelic Furs, but as soon as that song played in that film, I was transported. Like, I was like, oh my God. I remember this time. It was like hearken to a specific moment in my life. So I think that's part of it. But I normally wouldn't go out of my way to like listen to that.
I think the thing I find really interesting is that I think that there's still a residue of the sensation of, I think particularly in my early teens, where that feeling of, oh, what the fuck is this? And having to make adjustments to your frame of reference in order to fit something in, and the excitement of having to do that. The residue of that is carried through to present tense listening experiences. There's music that if I heard now for the first time, I would not even bother to listen to it ever again. It would do very little to illuminate my senses. But when it's imbued with that very instantaneous sense of, gosh, I remember the excitement when this was the, I don't know, heaviest rock song I'd ever heard. Or, do you know
well,
what
it's
I mean?
some kind of resonance. It's like a resonance that stays with you.
Yeah.
I mean, the other night when Alejandro Cohen of Dub Lab was DJing at our night procedure, he played Sigue Sigue Sputnik. And I went up to him, I was like, oh my God, I love Sigue Sigue Sputnik. And he was like, I love them too. So it was this moment where we both kind of geeked out about it. And I was just like, I just want to go home and listen to all Sigue Sigue Sputnik right now.
Oh, wow.
Like, it was very strange. Like, but it was, and it wasn't even a song that I'm like a super big fan of, but it was like, oh, it's that sound of that moment in time. So I'm looking at it right now because it's right next to the Psychedelic Furs that I downloaded. So yeah, there's just so much music out there.
Yeah.
This is by far. It's hard to. If I had to do this before when someone asked me about albums, and I kind of whittled it down to like, I think it was like 6 or 7, but then to whittle it down to these 3.5, 4, was much harder because I was also trying to think of what, in terms of a conversation, what leads to what.
Thank you, Richard, so much. This has been excellent. It's been so nice chatting to you, and really illuminating for me, having listened to your music now for quite some years, to I don't know, to learn about your own lineage as an artist to some extent. That's been really great for me, so thank you.
These little, you can put these little push pins in my history of what it all means. Well, thank you for having me. I enjoyed talking about this.
If people want to go and listen to your music or find out what you're up to, where should they go?
Well, they can go to Bandcamp and search my name. It's richardchartier.bandcamp.com, or you can go to my label lineimprint.bandcamp.com, and you can listen to things and see if you like them. And sometimes there's, free, pay what you want, name your price type things, and they can get a kind of a broad spectrum of what I've been doing as under Richard Chartier and as Pinkcourtesyphone and other collaborative works.
Thank you once again, Richard, and to everyone listening, I will see you next time.